If you still think that muscles are broken down in the gym and built back up bigger and stronger outside of the gym, then unfortunately your understanding of how muscle grows is outdated. As a result, your workouts are probably inefficient or even perhaps downright ineffective, especially the higher up in training experience you get. And how do I know? Well, not only is this all scientifically proven, and I'm going to break all of it down for you shortly, but admittedly, I was in that boat myself not that long ago. So hopefully I saved somebody else out there from being in that boat any longer or getting in it in the first place by breaking this concept down for you today. So let's go ahead and dive in and talk about mechanical tension, because mechanical tension is in fact the only current proven direct cause of hypertrophy, i.e. muscle gain. So a lot of people don't know what mechanical tension actually is. You're going to know after this video. How to achieve it, you're going to know after this video. And more importantly, how to do so in the most effective way, because we can all achieve mechanical tension, but to consistently achieve it as efficiently as possible while recovering perfectly and essentially optimizing our training so that we get the best possible results as we progress every single year that goes by. Now that is what we are after. That is what I hope to help you with. So let's talk about mechanical tension. What it is, I've already mentioned, but I do want to reiterate, it is proven to be, so far, the only direct driver of hypertrophy. Now, this is in contrast to what was once believed, muscle damage, to be the cause. In other words, muscle damage is when the muscle fiber actually gets broken down and damaged. And I can understand why people thought that, and why even I thought that at one point, because at one point the literature suggested that it did, because they would measure and see muscle damage cause an increase in muscle protein synthesis, which myofibrillar protein synthesis is the same thing that elevates when we're growing muscle. So they figured, well, muscle damage elevates the myofibrillar protein synthesis, so it must mean that more muscle growth is occurring. But unfortunately, what has been found out over the years as more data accumulates is that muscle damage is actually treated somewhat like an injury in the body. And so the protein synthesis that's elevated is elevated for the repair process of those muscle fibers, which just so happens to be a different process than the building of new contractile tissue, contractile proteins. So after all this time, we started to discover and now are coming to a relatively solid conclusion that muscle damage probably does not actually directly cause hypertrophy, and in fact may hinder it, as we'll get into shortly. The next one is metabolic stress. These are essentially the three things that occur from resistance training: mechanical tension, muscle damage, metabolic stress. Metabolic stress would be associated with the pumps. The crazy pump, as many people know, is an accumulation of lactic acid, metabolites in the blood in that local region that causes that insane burn, the vascularity to pop, and oftentimes causes you to stop the set because you just can't even handle the sensation of the pump anymore. And let's be honest, who doesn't love an insane pump? I know I do, and I always have. You probably wouldn't be watching this video if you didn't. It's just a gym bro or gym gal type of obsession. Obviously, makes total sense. However, the issue lies in what we once thought was a good idea, which is crazy high rep sets, a shit ton of sets, low rest times between sets, supersets, drop sets, more drop sets, monster sets, giant sets, all these different terms that essentially would relate to increasing insane pumps and creating as much metabolic stress as possible, because similar to muscle damage, it was once thought that perhaps this metabolic stress is also conducive to hypertrophy. We're only finding out more and more that it does not appear to be the case, and again, may hinder your ability to stimulate the growth we're looking for. So the key about mechanical tension, what is that related to? Mechanical tension can be described in many ways because, for example, if I squat down right now and hold this squat, there's technically tension, mechanical tension occurring in my quads. But that's not the mechanical tension that we're after. We want a certain threshold, if you will, a certain extent of mechanical tension that causes high threshold motor units in the actual muscle fiber to activate, because those motor units, those muscle fibers in the motor units, are the ones susceptible to growing larger. So if I go like this with my quads and hold this squat, which I could do for I don't know how many minutes or even hours perhaps, I can do that, but I'm not stimulating the muscle fibers that grow. I'm stimulating the smaller, the type 1 muscle fibers that aren't subject to grow anymore. So that's not the mechanical tension we want. The mechanical tension we want happens when the bar speed or the movement speed of whatever exercise we're doing begins to slow involuntarily against maximum force production. Okay, so you can imagine a bench press, our favorite example, mine at least. As the bench press starts to get harder, the muscle can't push the weight much more, you're reaching failure, the speed of the bar starts to slow involuntarily as a result. We all know this feeling. And that is where the mechanical tension signal for hypertrophy is essentially beginning. So this is how we achieve it. It's by approaching failure on any given set. And this is also known as intensity as it relates to muscle growth. So still, huge misconception these days is that intensity is panting like crazy, sweating like crazy, because your cardiovascular system is super involved, because you're taking low rest times, because the burn is insane, the pump is insane, and it's mentally grueling, let's say. But that's actually not intensity as it pertains to muscle gain. Intensity here just means how close to failure did you get on a given set. Anybody doing 40, 50 sets per muscle group per week, which is a lot of people, both enhanced and natural, though the enhanced people can get away with it, doesn't matter. The point is the only reason you can do that many sets is because your per set intensity is low. So it is a fact to state that you train with low intensity if you train with very high volumes, okay? They have an inverse relationship. The closer to failure you get on any given set, the more mechanical tension we're seeking that stimulates muscle growth, okay? Now, with that said, based on the effective reps model, which seems to be relatively accurate in many ways, it suggested that it's going to be around the last 5 reps, which coincidentally enough is when the bar speed begins to slow involuntarily. All right, so it's those last 5 reps to failure, of course, give or take for some people, that we're really starting to get the maximum amount of tension that we want to get the most out of that set. You can still achieve some tension 10 reps away from failure, but it's going to be so minimal that it's almost negligible, right? So we need to achieve that certain level. It begins somewhere around the last 5 reps to failure. Now, this doesn't mean going to failure every single set is the ideal case scenario, though for some it might be. It really depends on your schedule, your preference, and what you can handle and so on. But there's something we need to account for when it comes to this mechanical tension thing. If it was as simple as just go to failure in every set, then there you go, end the video. But the video's still going, as you can see the timer. And that's because we need to understand fatigue. The whole purpose of exercise science as it pertains specifically to building muscle, for example, is precisely trying to solve the equation of maximizing growth stimulus and minimizing the hindrance of said stimulus, i.e. fatigue. And so fatigue is what gets in the way of this. Going to failure every single set produces large amounts of fatigue. That's the downside. So here's what we have to understand. The fatigue that hinders it can happen within a session. Now, ironically enough, metabolic stress is a form of local/peripheral fatigue that occurs in the given session. The more metabolic stress you're inducing, then the lower perception or accuracy by which you can gauge intensity to achieve mechanical tension, right? So if your arm is absolutely burning like crazy, but you're still very far from failure because you're doing a very light load that you could do 50 reps for, yeah, you're getting all this metabolic stress in the muscle, and all that lactate doesn't just dissipate completely, you're causing some form of fatigue in that moment, then that's going to hinder you from achieving the mechanical tension you want in subsequent sets, all right? So peripheral fatigue, it would be a result of taking very low rest times between sets, so you're not recovering enough to go and maximize your next set's stimulus. And then you've got central fatigue. Obviously, if the muscle is too damaged and you try and work it out again, force production itself is lowered. But if my legs are heavily damaged from a workout I did 4 days ago, they're still damaged, which is obviously totally possible, then it could still hinder in more ways than one my ability to perform or achieve maximum stimulus on the arm workout I'm doing later, okay? Because the central fatigue is coming from the nervous system. Damage, inflammation, they go hand in hand to a large extent. You're simply not recovered. That is what's going to hinder subsequent workouts. So if you're totally fresh right now, boom, you go to failure for 3 sets per muscle group, no problem. You might have maximized your stimulus. But doing that every single week, that's where things get tricky. It's overall programming, and we can call the accumulation of fatigue that isn't dissipated and that starts to get in the way of appropriate stimulus, mechanical tension, is simply a result of poor programming. So this is the thing that plagues most people, is they aren't programming their workouts effectively, and what happens is it's insidious sometimes because, like myself, you're doing so much volume over time that you don't realize after 5 years you have worn out your joints so much, or the amount of damage has accumulated constantly to a level that your body doesn't recover, and boom, you get an injury. And I've dealt with so many injuries throughout my lifting career as a result of poor programming. Then I started fixing my programming, optimizing for the variables and for the factors I'm explaining to you here, and injuries not only are not occurring, but they're helping heal previous injuries and issues that I had in the meantime because recovery is prioritized and programming has been optimized. Now, another thing to understand is low glycogen levels will impact and impede your ability to maximize the stimulus in any given workout. So obviously, if you're not eating enough carbs in general, which is why caloric deficits are not as conducive to muscle growth as hypercaloric diets, because you're eating much less carbs, and being in a deficit, you're going to deplete the glycogen. And so each training session is less effective when in a hypocaloric state, especially as carbs get lower and lower, because you don't have as much glycogen in the muscle for it to maximize the tension that it can achieve in that muscle, all right? So obviously poor nutrition habits, or just simply depending on your goal currently where your nutrition is at, poor sleep is obviously going to impact this as well. It impacts general body composition in many ways. Also, this fatigue that we talked about prior can hinder your ability to replenish glycogen in that muscle or even absorb as much as it had before the workout. So if the muscle has experienced muscle damage, temporarily it will not be able to store as much glycogen or replenish the glycogen stores to its maximum capacity because the damage, the fatigue, has hindered that ability. So ironically, we've got people that are blasting massive amounts of volume in sets and then immediately after the workout trying to get in all their carbs and go into this huge surplus, but a lot of those carbs are not able to get into the muscle where they otherwise would have if the programming was a little bit better. I hope that makes sense. So these are the two main things we want to look out for that would hinder your ability to achieve the tension, not only on a per set basis in a single session, but on every session going forward. So how much of this mechanical tension should you aim for? Obviously, the recommendations can vary and will vary from person to person, depending on experience level and so on. But a general place to start is probably going to be somewhere between 20 and 30 effective reps if we use that model. 20 to 30 effective reps is one way to put it. I like to simplify it and break it down in somewhat of a more digestible way by saying 3 to 10 sets per muscle group per an entire week, somewhere between 0 and 2 reps in reserve. Because again, going to failure every time means accumulation of muscle damage to a large degree, accumulation of fatigue to a large degree. And if you want a little bit more volume on a certain muscle because you can handle it or you're just prioritizing it or whatever it may be, well then it might be a useful tool to stay slightly away from failure because that way you can actually manage more volume or more frequency, which is a tool to organize volume. So I hope that makes sense. 3 to 10 sets per muscle group per week at 0 to 2 reps in reserve is ideal. To start, this is just a starting point, and I like to give a starting point that errs on the side of being conservative, of staying on the low end, because it's always easier to add volume down the line if needed. It's always hey, let me do a little bit more because it seems I'm recovering just fine, though it will take a few weeks for you to actually determine that, rather than saying, holy shit, I'm burnt out, I'm destroyed, I have to deload for a week to dissipate this fatigue, and now I have to try and get used to mentally doing less volume than I otherwise did. That's a lot tougher mentally. So start on the lower side, 3 to 10 sets per muscle group per week. For a lot of people, this will be enough. And consider overlap and of course fatigue. Keep in mind that it takes 18 sets to failure to double the stimulus you get from 3 sets. So why am I saying that? Why does that matter? Because it's to illustrate the fact that more is not always better. And in many cases, it's worse. Because 18 sets, you need 6 times the amount of sets to simply double the stimulus you got from the first 3. Because every set that you do is accumulating tons of fatigue, which means your amount of mechanical tension, your efficacy per set is decreasing exponentially, and your fatigue is increasing exponentially. So sure, you can do 18 sets because you're like, well, that's double the stimulus. It's also probably double, triple, quadruple the fatigue, which is going to impair you later as opposed to thinking about just this single session. So keep that in mind. Consider overlap between muscle groups on certain exercises and consider fatigue. Failure on every set is not necessarily ideal unless you're going to stick to the very low end for all of this, which could be a viable option for you if you don't have the time or you just prefer it and you want to make workouts as short as possible, etc., or you just respond better to it. That's fine. You can go to failure on every set if that's the case. But if you're trying to get some extra volumes in there, you find that it works better for you, whatever the case, then staying somewhere shy of failure is probably a good idea to manage that. So here's a practical summary to take away so you can instantly optimize your training and make sure that you're on the right path with maximizing mechanical tension and minimizing fatigue. That's the whole point here, right? That's the whole equation. So first and foremost, you're not going to chase pumps. You're not just going to throw a 30 rep set in there for the fuck of it, thinking that, yeah, because the pump is sick, because my pro bodybuilder mentor told me. No, chasing the pumps, not necessary and actually probably not conducive to what we're after here. But the cool thing is if you do all of this properly and you're achieving the mechanical tension you need on a per set basis with high intensity, then you will achieve an insane pump anyways. That should be a byproduct, not the target. Don't chase soreness. If you're chasing soreness, it means you're typically doing massive amounts of volume. And yeah, you feel good the next day because again, you think, oh, this is good. I'm so sore. I can't sit down on the toilet. Me for the last 10 years. Well, guess what? There's going to be some workouts that are so productive and you don't get that sore from. And other workouts that are so unproductive that you're insanely sore from. So don't make soreness the target. Focus on the variables we're looking for here. Focus on stimulus, right? 0 to 2 reps in reserve, 3 to 10 sets per muscle group per week, as I outlined earlier. Start there. Obviously, giving your higher priority muscle groups a little bit higher volumes, the lower ones, lower volumes to manage it. Consider overlap between exercises and muscle groups. Consistent technique across the board. A big mistake people make is they'll start slowly breaking their technique down because it's not standardized, and as a result they think they're progressively overloading, they think that they're achieving mechanical tension every single set, etc. But really they're actually just breaking their technique down, they're moving towards injury, and as a result they're getting less mechanical tension than they actually think. So make sure technique is consistent, film yourself, standardize it, and keep it clean. Mostly 5 to 10 rep range should be the goal here as far as your working sets are concerned. Almost all of them should probably fall somewhere around 5 to 10 reps. You can go higher in some cases, totally fine. You can even go lower, 4 rep set, 3 rep set. Though once you start to dip under that, it starts to become kind of inefficient because if you're hitting failure, which is the only way to get some effective reps out of a 1 or 2 rep set, it's going to be very taxing. It's just not the most efficient way to do it. So mostly 5 to 10 rep range is where we can maximize the effective reps, staying within those RIR ranges, okay? You can, of course, throw some higher rep sets if it's easier on joints for you in certain cases. For myself, it's triceps. You know, I can't do super heavy on triceps because my tendons, my elbows start to feel it. So you go a little higher on that, no problem, as long as you're keeping intensity where it needs to be. And then track your workouts for progressive overload before altering volumes to make sure that you're actually overloading, you're seeing some progress in there, and then you can try and test adding a tiny bit more volume, see if that's conducive to still progressive overload, and then you got more volume there, that should be conducive to muscle growth as a whole. So with that said, this is mechanical tension, and now hopefully you understand better how to maximize the stimulus for muscle growth out of your workouts while minimizing the fatigue and the very things that we once thought may have contributed to them, and we now understand probably don't, and may even hinder it to a degree as they cause fatigue. So maximize mechanical tension, minimize fatigue, optimize your programming, and take your results to the next level. If you want to take the thinking out of all of this, you want to instantly jump into optimized training that's going to help you not only see insane results in the coming weeks or months, but also teach you, see what works best for you, help you with a tracker and me coaching you through it all, get into an awesome app that you can use to actually track these workouts in, see your progress over time, see if progressive overloads occurring, having me on there and actually doing the workouts so you know you're in the right volumes and intensity. Take all the guesswork out of it so you can over time know what works better for you and take it all on your own. If you're interested in that, you can try it out for 7 days free in the link in my description below. As always, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you guys. Hope you found this video helpful. If so, give it a like, share it with all your high volume junkie friends, pro bodybuilders, and all those people so they can get mad at me. Drop some hate comments down below. Always love those. And as always, drop any other topics you want me to cover down below. I appreciate you as always. I'll see you in the next video. I'm out.